He stepped off the plane dragging his oversized suitcase behind him, and the first thing he noticed wasn't Big Ben or a double-decker bus. It was the rain. Not a light drizzle, not a soft mist, but the kind of relentless, steady rain that makes you question every life choice that led you here. As an American stepping into the UK for the very first time, he was expecting polite smiles and quaint streets, but what he got was something far more confusing. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, please subscribe, like my video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. Walking through the airport, he immediately realized that something was different. The announcements were in English, sure, but it sounded like English that had gone through a funhouse mirror. Mind the gap, they said, and he wondered if it was a polite suggestion or some kind of British curse. He tried to respond with his usual American charm, a simple thanks, and a nod, only to be met with a blank stare from a man behind the ticket counter who clearly thought he had committed a minor crime. Here it was, the first cultural shock. Americans think everyone understands us instantly, but in the UK, apparently, accents are an entire obstacle course. Out on the streets of London, the chaos of red buses and black cabs was like stepping into a movie, but he quickly learned that no movie prepared him for the pedestrian rules. Cars drive on the left, not just a little on the left, but completely, dangerously, terrifyingly on the left. Crossing the street became a high-stakes game of guess and dodge. Every instinct he had as an American screamed, "Look right first," but he had to fight against that muscle memory with every step. The first time he survived a crossing felt like winning a tiny personal Olympics medal. Then came the food. British cuisine, a topic that had haunted his expectations for weeks. He had imagined quaint tea rooms and scones with jam, but reality hit him like a soggy biscuit. Ordering fish and chips, he was handed a massive paper-wrapped bundle that was more grease than fish, and he immediately tried to superimpose his American sense of portion size on it, only to realize this was a different universe. And when he asked for ketchup, the cashier's reaction could have been a felony trial. "Ketchup?" she said with a mix of horror and pity. He quickly learned that in the UK, chips are sacred and must only be touched by salt and malt vinegar, and asking for ketchup is apparently a cultural faux pas of the highest order. His adventures only intensified when he tried public transportation. The tube, as the locals call it, seemed simple enough on the map, but stepping onto it in real life was like entering a sardine can of moving metal. The people didn't stand politely like Americans, they flowed like a river around him, a force of nature he could neither predict nor control. And every time he asked a local for directions, the reply sounded like a riddle. "You want the Jubilee line? Go down, then up, but not too far, mind the step, and don't forget to touch in." He nodded like he understood, but inside, he was calculating the probability of survival on a 30-minute journey. Then, there was the language shock. He had studied British English online, watched TV shows, even listened to podcasts, but nothing prepared him for the speed at which people actually spoke. Someone asked him if he wanted a fag, and his mind immediately raced to inappropriate American thoughts. Turns out, it was just a cigarette. Another time, someone told him to pop round later, and he had to pause and ask, "Round? Like in a circle? What do you mean?" Each phrase became a mini cultural puzzle, forcing him to laugh at himself, over and over again. Even small things that seemed trivial became sources of comedy. Queuing, for example. In America, we push, we shove. We try to assert our space. In the UK, queuing is sacred, almost religious. He accidentally cut in line at a bakery and received a look so sharp it could have cut glass. He quickly apologized, mumbling something about cultural differences, and backed up only to notice everyone behind him giving each other subtle nods of approval that he hadn't earned. Queuing etiquette became his ongoing lesson in humility. The weather, the accents, the food, the transportation, even the humor, it all added up to one overwhelming revelation. The UK operates on a system that made perfect sense to locals, but was completely alien to him. He laughed, he stumbled, he probably looked ridiculous, more times than he could count, but he also started noticing the small joys. The smell of fresh bread from corner bakeries, the historic charm of cobbled streets, and the quiet politeness that was so different from the American go big or go home attitude. Slowly, the shock started transforming into awe. Shopping in a local market became another stage for cultural shocks. He asked for sneakers, expecting a straightforward transaction, and was asked his shoe size in a way that made him feel like he was auditioning for a British fashion show. And then came the prices, expressed in pounds instead of dollars, forcing him to do mental gymnastics every time he wanted to buy a snack or souvenir. He realized he'd been calculating currency conversion wrong the entire trip, which explained why he felt mysteriously poor after every purchase. Even the humor caught him off guard. British humor, he quickly learned, isn't about in-your-face punchlines. It's dry, ironic, and often confusing. A man in a pub told him, "Lovely weather, isn't it?" in the middle of a torrential downpour. He laughed nervously, unsure if it was sarcasm or sincere small talk. Every joke required a mental recalibration. And the more he laughed, the more he understood that maybe the biggest cultural shock wasn't the traffic or the food or the language. It was learning how differently people could see the world and still be perfectly happy. By the time he visited a traditional pub, he finally felt a sense of belonging. He tried ordering a pint of ale, and the bartender gave him a knowing smile, as if to say, "Welcome, you've made it through the crash course." Sitting there, listening to locals debate football teams, politics, and the best kind of sausage roll, he realized that the UK had subtly, almost imperceptibly pulled him into its rhythm. It was still a shock, yes, but now it was a shock he could appreciate, even laugh at. Stepping out into the night, with rain lightly falling and the city lights reflecting on the wet pavement, he understood that cultural shock wasn't just about confusion, it was about discovery. Every misstep, every awkward exchange, every moment of panic on the tube had led to a deeper understanding of a world that wasn't his, but could still feel like home in unexpected ways. By the end of his first week, he was still American, but he was also something else, a slightly wiser, infinitely more entertained visitor who now had a lifetime of stories about his first bewildering, hilarious, and unforgettable journey through the UK. He laughed to himself, thinking about all the moments he'd survived and the lessons he'd learned. Queuing properly, avoiding ketchup on chips, understanding dry humor, and nodding politely when someone said, "Mind the gap." These weren't just cultural adjustments. They were badges of honor, and as he looked up at the sky, gray but beautiful in its own way, he realized something profound. The biggest cultural shock wasn't just the differences, it was the thrill of seeing the world from a completely new perspective. And honestly, he couldn't wait to see what else the UK had in store. Just when he thought he had seen it all, the UK decided to throw a few more surprises his way. Part 2 of his cultural shock began at breakfast. He confidently walked into a cafe, ordered pancakes with syrup, and waited for the American-sized portion he had envisioned. Instead, he got something that looked more like a delicate work of art than breakfast. A single thin pancake with a tiny dollop of cream and a drizzle of something called golden syrup. He stared at it in disbelief, wondering if he had accidentally wandered into a Michelin star restaurant. The barista smiled knowingly, as if to say, "Welcome to the UK, where pancakes are polite." Next came the public restroom experience, a shock he could have never prepared for. He opened the door to find a toilet that required him to figure out not just the flush mechanism, but also whether a tip or coin was necessary for usage. He hesitated, then panicked, then realized that the friendly British signage wasn't optional. It was mandatory reading. Every trip to the restroom became a mini adventure, teaching him patience, observation, and humility in equal measure. And then, the ultimate shock. Supermarket shopping. He reached for a familiar American product, only to find it replaced by something unrecognizable. "What on earth is this?" he muttered, holding a tin of beans that came in a color-coded system he couldn't decode. He quickly learned that even groceries in the UK had a cultural twist. Labels like baked beans and squash weren't what he expected, and his mental conversion chart was quickly failing. Every aisle became a puzzle, and every purchase a triumph or disaster. By the end of part 2, he had begun to embrace the chaos. He learned to laugh when someone called the elevator a lift, when chips meant fries but crisps meant chips, and when his GPS insisted he turn left while driving on the wrong side of the road. The cultural shock hadn't gone away. It had evolved into something else. Admiration, humor,